There are two basic parts to learning how to read music. The first part is understanding the logic of the system. We have the staff, we have the lines and spaces, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all that stuff. I covered that last lesson and it took 20 minutes or so. And by the end of it, you should be in pretty good shape. It's really just not that hard. The second part, though, is getting good at reading it, the same way you'd pick up a book and you just read the words. Now that takes years, not minutes. There are certain things about reading music that make it just really difficult. Plus, it just takes a lot of practice. You'll notice that I never write music notation in any of my theory lessons. It's because it's so hard to read that most of the time it makes the theory harder to understand rather than making it easier. So the plan is for this to play out over 2 or 3 videos. I had said before I do one, I don't know what I was thinking. This is way too much stuff for one video. But the only goal is to help you understand why reading music is so difficult and show you how to overcome those certain difficulties, or give you a way to actually learn it. If you don't have the right approach, it's easy to end up wasting a lot of time reading music. There's people who read music for years and they still suck at it. So you really need the right approach. So we're going to start by comparing music to reading English. In the case of music, we have staff, lines, and spaces, and we get a symbol, and we're trying to attach this symbol to a meaning. So we want to know what note this is. Now think back to being a little kid, learning your ABCs. You get a symbol, so in this case, a letter, and you're trying to attach that letter to a sound. You're trying to learn that A makes an A sound. Now, at first, you have no way of connecting these things. You're not born knowing how to read music or how the letters work. So you're given some basic memory tricks to kind of get you started and be able to figure out pretty easily what's what. So in the case of English, you're given something like A is for apple, or B is for bat, or C is for car. So that's your memory trick there. In the case of music, you learn something like space rhymes with face, or the lines are every good boy deserves fudge. And that's your memory trick for music. Now, A is for apple is brilliant. Every good boy deserves fudge is terrible. This is one of the main reasons why music is so difficult to read. And it all has to do with the way our memory works. So for example, if I said, name every character you can think of in the Star Wars universe, you would not just rattle off a list of every single character in alphabetical order. Now, it's not a challenge. I'm sure some of you actually can do that. But for most people, you would think, okay, let's see. Star Wars, the iconic character is Luke Skywalker, and his nemesis is Darth Vader, and he works for Emperor Palpatine. He killed Obi-Wan Kenobi. He worked for Qui-Gon, or trained with Qui-Gon. You get the idea. Spoiler alert in case you've been putting off watching Star Wars for 40 years. But the point is that you don't think of characters like a computer does, like some big index. You think of them by linking them. Your mind links one piece of information with another piece of information, which links to another and another, and you wind up with this big long web of one little piece of information linking to something far away. So if I say Star Wars, you might have to think really hard and go through many links before you get to some obscure little character that was in the cantina on Tatooine or whatever. But that's how your mind works, at least in terms of memory. Now, A is for apple. We're trying to link a symbol with a sound. And in this case, the way we're doing it, using this little trick, is to link A, the symbol, with the idea or the visualization of an apple. So there's my beautiful rendition of an apple. And then the apple, that idea, links you to the sound A. Pretty sure that's how you spell that. So you basically have 2 links. The symbol to the image to the sound. Or maybe not necessarily image, but the idea, the concept of an apple. Now in the case of music, I have a symbol. I have this little every good boy deserves fudge thing that I've learned. So I think, okay, I don't know what note that is, so I'll think of every. I'm linking the symbol to this word, and then I'm linking that word to the next word of good, and then that links to boy, and that links to deserves. Then the word deserves gets me to the letter D. So I wind up with D. So that's 5 links, depending on how you count them, maybe more, which is a hell of a lot more than 2. But imagine we're trying to figure out a note like this. In this case, I may have to think, well, I don't know what it is. Every good boy deserves fudge. This is an F, G, A, B, C. So I could be going through 10 or 12 links. Now, if time is not a factor, say I'm taking a music theory test or something, maybe this isn't a huge problem. I can figure this stuff out eventually, but even then, I'm spending a lot of brain power having to figure out every note, and that can take away from me being able to focus on the test itself. But we are trying to read. We have to do this in real time. So the number of links it takes to get from the symbol to the meaning is the most important thing in the world. So we're already off to a bad start with music. This is really cumbersome, takes forever to figure out, but that's not really even the real problem. The goal is 1 link. I want to see a note and I want to know what it means, just like I see a letter and I know what sound it makes. Or a word, for example. If I say potato, you think of a potato. There's no system in your head. You don't have to figure out what a potato is. You have a direct link from the word potato to the idea of a potato. That's why I can talk to you in real time and you can understand in real time, because every word I say is linked directly to a definition. So that's the direct link. That's what we're ultimately after. Now, in general, the more steps it takes to go from the symbol to the meaning, the harder it is to establish that direct link. By the time I've sat here and counted my way around and figured it out, I'm not really focusing on the original symbol and the actual meaning anymore. There's way too much other clutter happening. So A is for Apple transitions into the direct link really well, for 2 reasons. The first is that there's only 2 links, and in general, it's just way easier to connect these 2 things if there's less stuff happening in between. But the second part is that I'm tying this symbol to something very memorable. I'm tying it to the image of an apple, this tangible thing that I can feel and taste and smell and all that stuff. It's the kind of thing that just sticks in your memory really well. Now, every good boy deserves fudge. It's memorable. I mean, it's easy to remember when you're first told that. It's visual, you can picture it, but it doesn't really help associate with this symbol directly. It's not helping me tie this to this. It's using this very roundabout way of getting there. I'm having to count through other stuff, and I'm using that same image or visual for every single line or something else for every space. So it just doesn't work the same way that this does. So you get the idea. The way we learn music sucks. So what do? Well, learn music the same way you learn your ABCs. So let me clear this off and I'll show you what I mean. So say I want to learn the note C. Rather than think, okay, it's on a space rhymes with face, F-A-C-E. Rather than that garbage, try to associate this note with a car. Picture a little car. C is for car. Now this gives us the 2 links that we had with the A is for apple, rather than the 3 or 4 or however many we'd have using the other stuff. Now it's not quite the same as A is for apple. With the alphabet, you have these nice symbols like A, B, C, and they all look different. You don't tend to mix them up, but for music, everything pretty much looks the same. So you have to really go out of your way to engage your mind with the actual line or the space that it's on. Try to picture yourself in the car. Imagine looking down and seeing the 2 empty spaces underneath you. Imagine reaching up and feeling the empty space over your head. Do whatever you need to do to build a strong visualization between this space, the idea of a car, and the note C. Now, let's say for this space up here, right above the staff, this is a G. Maybe you picture gasoline. Picture this little pool of gas kind of dripping down through the lines and spaces. Or on the bottom, this is an F. Picture fire or something, like a basement fire spreading up through all the lines and spaces. Now, I'm not going to do all these for you. I know my drawing skills are pretty breathtaking, but it's actually better if you do all of this. Sit here and try to come up with something and come up with a visual and try to make it really strong and start to build that little 2-step association between a note and a visual. Now, if you think this is kind of weird, this is sort of silly, this doesn't really feel like the right way to do it, go pick up a memory book. Moonwalking with Einstein is one that I recommend, but there's plenty of others. Go look up the major system or the Dominic system. Look at how, there's people who compete in memory competitions. One guy learned a 500-digit number in 5 minutes or something like that. All of that stuff, all the memory stuff, involves exactly this. It's building strong visualizations, which is something your mind can really grab onto and remember. And then it involves linking one thing to another. So this is, I promise you, the right approach. And these little things, as silly as they seem, they go away pretty quickly, just like the A is for Apple thing does. It very nicely transitions into the direct link, where you see this space and you know that it's a C and nothing else actually happens in your head. Now there's another method you should know about that kind of helps with all of this, and it's called spaced repetition. So obviously, if you're going to learn something, and especially when you're trying to build that direct link, you need to repeat it and continuously revisit that. But you have to be very careful with repetition. You'll see sometimes a teacher will tell a student write this word over and over or something like that. That's almost completely useless because it just holds something in your short-term memory. Here's an example. Imagine that you're on the phone with somebody and they tell you a phone number. And you've probably done this. They tell you the number and you sit there and you try to remember it and you repeat it over and over and you 871-2301, 871-2301. You hang up, keep repeating it, 871-2301, and you dial into the dialer and you make the call. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, that number is 100% gone. It's not there anymore. Because you sitting there repeating it over and over, you're not building any kind of long-term memory. You're just holding it in short-term memory. So spaced repetition, part of the idea is to deal with that. So the way it works is it's essentially like a card system. So like flashcards. So you have the thing on the front, the answer on the back. And what you would do is you see the flashcard, and if you know it, you set it aside. If you don't know it, it goes back into the deck and you sit there and essentially weed out everything that you know really well, and you don't see that again for a while. Anything you don't know, you're going to see it again soon, but not immediately. It keeps it outside of that short-term memory. Now, usually this is a piece of software, not necessarily using your own cards. And there's some complicated rules on how long you delay a card, and if you know it the second time you see it, you delay it for even longer. But usually use a piece of software to do this. So Anki is what I've used, ANKI. It's free if you download it on a desktop. I think if you get it on your phone, it costs money. And you would download a deck that somebody's created, or you can create your own. And it just kind of handles this for you. The main point, though, is that it causes you to have to remember and focus on something once it's outside of your short-term memory, where you're actually addressing that deeper, committing it to long-term memory link. And it helps you focus on the parts that you have trouble with, not the stuff that you already know. So that stuff gets kind of pushed off until much later. And you can start with 10 cards, on the first day, work on those, and you would build up your visualizations, focus on that, and then the next day you'd add in some more, and you'd keep going through them like that. The point, though, if you use that or not, whether you're just reading music and practicing that way, you have to be very careful about how you remember a note. You can cheat. Once you understand the basics, any given note you can figure out by counting through or using the little memory tricks. But if you're trying to learn this, you have to force yourself not to do that unless you simply haven't built a visualization or you simply can't remember. You want to force yourself to use at most 2 links to get from the symbol to the meaning, or the note to what it actually means. And you're trying to transition into the direct link where you're not using that at all. So if you do the flashcards or working on sheet music, just be very diligent that you're doing it right. If you feel like this is a lot, it's going to be exhausting having to come up with everything and build a visualization, don't be a baby. There's 26 letters in the alphabet. You learned that as a little kid. There's only 5 lines and 4 spaces on the staff. So that's only 9 things. You could go up to, 3 ledger lines up and below, and it's still less things to remember than when you learned your alphabet. So it really is not that hard, and it saves you a ridiculous amount of time in the long run. Like I said, this is, I'm very convinced, the right way to approach learning. Now, this is just a first step, though. Obviously, there's more to reading music than this, in the same way that there's more to reading English than just learning what sounds the letters make. You have to assemble notes into patterns and phrases in the same way that you assemble letters into words and phrases. But anyway, that's stuff for the next video. For now, your main first goal is to start establishing the direct link from a note to its meaning. You can't really get anywhere else without doing that. Now, one final thing. Not everyone needs to be good at reading music. Depends on your goals, depends on your instrument, depends on the style you want to get into. And I've done videos on how to figure that out. I've been comparing music to English, and people like to talk about music as a language. Like, oh, playing music is like speaking it, and you have to learn how to read and write it. There are some parallels between music and language, and maybe we'll do a kind of a philosophy video on that at some point. But for now, they're totally different. Music is not a language. Most musicians need to learn to read and write it to some degree, but you don't really have to be super good at it. There's this misconception that when you sit down to learn a piece, you should be able to sight read it all the way through. But most of the time when you're sight reading something, it's because somebody's giving you a sight reading test. Most music that you're actually going to sit there and learn is way too difficult to even play the first time. You have to practice it for weeks, so there's no way you can sight read it. Likely, you're going to wind up memorizing it, either completely, where you play without the music at all, or partially, where you have a lot of it memorized and you're relying on the music in front of you for some small things. Getting good at reading music makes the learning process much faster and much easier, and usually a lot more pleasant. And it can let you rely more on your reading skills if you do have the music in front of you. You don't necessarily have to memorize quite as much. You should work on reading music because it makes your life as a musician way easier. The learning process is simpler and easier, and you don't have to memorize as much, although in general, you should be memorizing a lot. But even if you suck at reading, that should not prevent you from learning good music. Don't mix these up in your head. Being a good reader is something you can work on in parallel to working on learning difficult music and being a good player. All right, more to come. That is not it. This is just where you start when it comes to learning to read well, but we'll deal with the other stuff in later lessons. I have a Patreon if you want to help support, but otherwise, that's all for now. See you in the next one.